Spectrovision Radio.
My hometown. In many ways, the postcard-perfect New England town. Tree-lined streets, the most beautiful fall foliage, a couple of buildings listed on the National Register of Historic Places, a spirit of slow living and neighborliness, graced by a tranquil predictability that some might label boring, but I considered comforting. Many people crave excitement through difference, but what contented me was the warm embrace of familiarity and routine. I hadn't always embraced that sense, even though it had always resided within me. I'd been through that phase where you convince yourself that you should want something else, something more. It had led me astray for a while, but my quest to see what else was out there only fostered in me an acceptance of a truth I'd already known. That I'd been lucky enough to have started life right where I was meant to be. So I'd made a typical, yet to me immensely rewarding existence in my New England town, embracing its comforting stasis. But there was one blemish, one pockmark on the otherwise idyllic vision of small-town life. A scarred, fire-damaged wreck of a house on Red Pine Road. It stood right at the end of the street, just before the land sloped upward into the forested hills beyond. The Tibbs property. We still called it that. But who knew if someone in their family still owned it? In the years since the incident, the effect of the ghastly sight of that derelict property, and what had happened there, had been appropriated by parents all over town as a way to get their kids to fall in line. Be good, or Marie Tibbs will get you, they'd say. I did my best to avoid the place. But one day, a couple of weeks before my 40th birthday, my son Kieran asked if I could pick him up from his friend Hunter's house. Hunter was a new friend, and when Kieran told me his address, I realized I'd have to drive right by the Tibbs property. I scolded myself, not because I didn't have good reasons to not want to think about Marie Tibbs and what had happened to her, but because seeing the house itself wouldn't make the past any more present. I should be able to get a handle on this, I thought. By the time I was nearing the place, I just about managed to convince myself to behave like a rational adult. So, against my better judgment, I couldn't help but snatch a glance at it as I drove by. And when I did, I saw a figure standing in one of the upstairs windows, watching me. I hit the brakes, and stayed just staring out ahead for a moment. Surely not, I thought. Must be some kind of trick of the light, or of my mind. When I mustered up the courage to look back up at the house, there was no one there. No figure standing at the window. No one watching me. I made a note to myself, next time I'd tell Kieran to walk home, that the exercise would do him good. Because seeing that house, and having to remember Marie Tibbs, certainly wasn't doing me any favors. People don't like things they can't understand. Most people spend their lives trying to shape an existence that makes sense. So when something happens that they can't comprehend, they look at it as a threat. What happened to Marie Tibbs was one of those things. May 20, 1997. It was around 3 a.m. and Trent Gunderson was returning home from a fishing trip. The windows of his pickup truck opened to let in the night air and keep him alert, when he smelled smoke as he neared Red Pine Road. When he made the right turn onto the road itself, he saw that the house at the end, belonging to the Tibbs family, was ablaze. I grew up on Red Pine Road, and I was 11 at the time. The sound of the fire engines and commotion on the street woke me up. I clambered downstairs to find my mother and father already awake, staring out the window at the growing chaos. Their curiosity got the better of them, and they told me to put my shoes on, and we headed out to get a closer look. A crowd had already gathered outside the Tibbs property, the firefighters telling people to get back as they did battle with the mighty blaze. A particularly brave firefighter ran through the front door, disappearing into the flames. He emerged with something that seemed impossible. He was cradling a young girl, Marie Tibbs. She was in my grade at school. She appeared to be in shock, eyes open, unblinking stare, but she looked otherwise unharmed. The firefighter pulled off his mask as he got her to the already waiting ambulance. I still remember the strange look on his face. He was concerned, but not in the way you'd expect. Unnerved might be the more appropriate word. It wasn't hard to see why. Marie had somehow escaped the inferno completely unscathed. No burns, no smoke in her lungs. Nothing. Her parents hadn't been so lucky. They never left that house. Burned up with it. One evening, my wife Yasmin and I were chatting while preparing dinner, and she asked a question that caught me off guard. "You see what's going on up at the Tibbs place?" I froze. I'd only just managed to put that strange vision of the person in the window out of my mind, and here she was, unwittingly ready to push it right back in. "Someone's fixing the place up," she said, clearly not noticing my distress. "They're making quick work of it too, by the looks of it." I felt a disproportionate sense of relief, and the potato peeler I'd been wielding nearly dropped out of my hand. Maybe there had been someone at the window, the new owner, scoping out what work needed to be done, making plans. I wasn't letting the past drive me nuts all these years later after all. And if what Yasmin was saying was true, it meant I wouldn't have to avoid the place any longer. Wouldn't have to look at that strange, warped relic and be transported back to a time I wanted to forget. The next time my son went over to hang out with his friend Hunter, I told him I'd pick him up, even though Yasmin had already offered. I wanted to use it as an opportunity to really close the book on the whole thing. I was overjoyed when the house came into view. There was still scaffolding up, but the place was most of the way towards looking like a home again. Already, it was different enough from the husk that had been left after the fire that you'd never have known there'd been a fire at all. I smiled. It's time to forget, I thought to myself. Not long after, Yasmin told me we'd been invited to a housewarming party at the old Marie Tibbs house, as she put it. Everyone in the neighborhood was invited. Jane Tamian is her name, Yasmin said. I suggested that maybe we do Jane the solid of not referring to it as the Marie Tibbs place anymore. Let Jane get the start she deserves, without all the nonsense this town has projected onto that place. What do you say? Yasmin shrugged in a way that told me she thought I was overreacting, but agreed nonetheless. The night of the party drew in, and we planned to stop by for just a little while, drop off some kind of small gift, introduce ourselves. But when the door opened and we were greeted by Jane, plans changed. She was immediately attractive to me in a way which made me feel useless, in that kind of besotted teenage way where you just want to follow them around like a dewy-eyed puppy. I did my best to hide it, to get through the night as normal. After we'd been there for just over an hour, Yasmin nudged me, said we should get going, but I told her I was going to stay, pretending that there was nothing I'd rather do than hear more about Carter Klimke's fantasy football tips for the upcoming season. Yasmin shot me a puzzled look, but left, telling me to be quiet when I came in. The party marched on, but all night I found myself distracted, unable to prevent myself from looking over at Jane while someone spoke words to me that I was only half listening to. She didn't once look back at me, uninterested, but I felt no less compelled by her. I stayed until the last cluster of us decided to make a move. Jane showed us out, and our eyes finally met. In that moment, I could have sworn there was some mutual attraction, a longing for one another that hit me right in the core. I got home, but I didn't go to bed. Instead, I just sat on the couch, thinking of her, and of that place I'd been so keen to avoid, the one I now wanted nothing more than to visit again. After the fire, Marie had gone to live with her uncle on the outskirts of town. No one knew much about him. He was a recluse, kept to himself. There were whispers that he might be a drunk, but I for one never saw him enough to make any kind of assumption. People were relieved Marie was okay, but in a reserved kind of way that showed a lingering distrust beneath the surface. Outwardly, people expressed generic sympathy for the girl who lost her parents, even acted like her escaping that inferno was a miracle, while clearly worrying it was really an abomination underneath. By the time Marie was back at school, rumors had been circulating for some time. Who knows exactly how and why they started, but they were not kind. People were saying that Marie was responsible for the fire, that she'd intentionally torched her own parents. Some even went as far as saying that the only thing the doctors had found when they'd examined Marie at the hospital were strange scars on her body, clustered together in ways that made them look like symbols of some kind. She'd never been popular, but she became more of a loner than ever before. It didn't take long for the bullying to start. One day, during recess, Jennifer Boxton ran up behind Marie and shoved her so hard that she fell to the ground, right into a puddle of dirty water. "You killed your own family, you sick freak," Jennifer said. A crowd gathered, including me. I saw Jennifer put her foot on the back of Marie's head, push it down into the puddle of dirty water. "Drink it, you freak," Jennifer hissed. Marie was powerless. All she could do was obey the disturbing request of her tormentor. No one helped her. No one went to get one of the teachers. Everyone just stood, watching as she drank down that disgusting liquid. When Jennifer finally let her up, Marie didn't run. She didn't even cry. She just skulked off without a sound. At lunch, in the cafeteria later that day, Jennifer fell to the ground, body taken over by convulsions. I remember the whites of her eyes, the irises rolled back into her head, her lips contorted into a pained grimace. A few kids screamed. Teachers came rushing over. But amidst the commotion, I caught sight of Marie across the room. She was watching the whole thing intently, staring at Jennifer with a steely concentration as she writhed on the ground. And her mouth was moving, like she was whispering something to herself. Jane. I found myself thinking of nothing else, desperate that I'd bump into her. It finally happened one afternoon at the hardware store. She told me she was very capable of putting up shelves herself, but I insisted, blathering barely coherent nonsense about showing her what a neighborly town it was and welcoming people in the right way. We ended up putting up the shelves together, talking nonstop as we did. We had a connection. It was clear right away. I forgot entirely that I was in the Marie Tibbs house. Nothing could have been further from my mind. All I was focused on was how wonderful Jane made me feel. We became fast friends after that day, and it didn't take long for us to fall into each other's arms. It was a whirlwind affair, and, drunk on each other, we started to be less and less careful about making sure it remained a secret. I of course told other kids about what I'd seen in the cafeteria that day, Marie seemingly whispering to herself as Jennifer convulsed on the floor. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the rumor quickly became that what had happened to Jennifer was the result of a curse or spell put on her by Marie. It didn't take long for kids to start carving weird symbols in Marie's desk, or writing them on our school books when she wasn't looking, calling her a witch. but Marie started staring at me whenever I was in her presence. It was like it was somehow all my fault. It got so I couldn't take it. I'd avoid her whenever possible. And I started to get more and more angry about the way she was making me feel. One day, I returned home to find my wife Yasmin waiting for me. She told me that our son was at a friend's house and that we needed to talk. I knew before I even sat down what had happened. She told me she knew about me and Jane, and that there was no point me denying it, so I didn't. She kicked me out and I ended up moving in with Jane into what had been Marie Tibbs's house. In a small town like mine, people don't take well to adultery. My friends were all family friends, units that were friends with our unit. I'd rocked the boat, messed with the status quo, and they weren't happy about it. I found myself ostracized, but I didn't much care, because I had Jane. Being with her was so exhilarating, so gratifying, that it became all I craved, all I needed, and the feeling seemed to be mutual. She was interested only in spending time together, to the point that it felt like she didn't exist when she was out of my sight. I settled into a strange life, one which felt parallel to the existence I'd lived up until that point. Perhaps that's how I was able to justify what I was doing, not feel the full force of the blast after blowing up my life as I'd known it. But tiny fractures began to appear in the cocoon I'd built for myself. One night, I got up to use the bathroom. I can't say why, but when I returned to the bedroom, I felt compelled to look out of the window. I moved over to it, parted the curtains, and saw someone standing out in the forest. I squinted. The pale moonlight was only enough for me to make out their shape, their small frames standing between two trees. But suddenly, the figure burst into flame, an explosion of orange in the black night. I rushed downstairs, out the back door. I vaulted the fence at the edge of the backyard and ran up the slope. But there was no one there. The next morning, I was staring out that window again, up at the densely forested hills beyond, trying to make sense of what I'd experienced the previous night. What's out there? I turned to see Jane. She'd silently entered the room and stood watching me from just inside the doorframe. Nothing, I said. I moved away from the window, sat down on the edge of the bed, but Jane clearly wasn't convinced. She stood there expectantly, looking at me with an open expression that told me she knew there was more to it. I heard you last night, she said. I got up and saw you out there, searching in the forest. I sighed. No use pretending. The girl who lived here when I was a kid, I eventually replied. Jane smirked. You don't really think I've managed to somehow remain unaware of all that small-town nonsense? She asked. Rumors and gossip die hard in a place like this. She moved over to the window herself, stared out. Maybe that's why I like it so much, she muttered. Places like this write their own truths, decide what's real for themselves. I didn't understand, but then again I wasn't really listening. I was feeling a pressure in my chest and throat, like I was choking on words I needed to spit out. Something happened, something I'm really not proud of, I suddenly found myself saying. Jane turned, her expression now sympathetic. She clearly sensed in my tone that whatever it was I was feeling, it wasn't easy. She came over and sat beside me, placed her hand tenderly on my thigh, showing me she was there for me. I want to tell you, I said, but I'm afraid of how it'll make you see me. She smiled and shook her head, moved in closer. There's nothing you could tell me that will change where we're headed, she offered. I looked into her eyes, and I could see that she truly meant it. It was almost intoxicating. The promise of unburdening myself, of speaking aloud the secret I'd held within for so long. So I told her. A few months after the incident with Jennifer in the cafeteria, the school got an anonymous tip that they felt compelled to share with the police. They received word that Marie Tibbs was keeping something very disturbing in her locker. The cops came and raided it. Inside, they found items belonging to Bill Yarmouth and Evelyn Larson, two unrelated town residents who'd both recently passed away. Marie Tibbs never came back to school. It was all anyone could talk about. She was a witch. What kind of terrifying secret things was she doing when no one was looking? How did she get a hold of that stuff in the first place? And what was she planning on doing with it? People were as troubled by it as they were titillated. The truth was far less strange, but no less disturbing. I don't know who came up with it, Hugo Monahan or me. Whatever the case, we found ourselves hysterically egging each other on, letting the idea get more and more out of control. Hugo's family ran the funeral home, and we decided that the ultimate prank would be to take something from the bodies that were currently there being prepped for their services. We managed to swipe Will's watch and Evelyn's necklace, and carve what we thought looked like witchcrafty type symbols into them. We concocted a plan to hide them inside Marie's locker. When the ensuing shitstorm was happening, I did nothing to stop it. It had spiraled out of control far beyond what I'd anticipated. I was too scared of what the consequences would be to undo the terrible chain of events I'd set in motion. Whatever was happening to Marie, it was because of me, and I just let it carry on happening. Rumor had it she was institutionalized. Stranger still was the supposed update that she'd escaped the psychiatric facility she was being kept in. A year or so later, kids started to say they'd seen Marie, that she'd made her way back to our town and was living feral in the woods behind her old house. Sometimes kids I knew would head up there at night, daring each other to venture into the woods alone to look for her. I never once took them up on that offer. Jane didn't say much. I think she sensed that I just needed to get it out from inside me. We spent the rest of the evening like we would have any other. It was like she was immediately making good on her promise that whatever truth I had to reveal to her wouldn't change anything between us, that we were still headed where we were headed, as she'd put it. But the next morning, I woke up feeling really strange. My head was pounding, my chest was tight. I'm really coming down with something, I thought to myself. But it was unlike any illness I'd experienced before. It was like I was walking around in an oppressive haze, like just moving through the air in front of me was a challenge. I got out of bed and dragged myself downstairs. I poured myself a glass of orange juice and... Suddenly, everything shifted before my eyes. My surroundings were blackened, gutted and warped by fire. The sound of the glass of orange juice smashing on the kitchen tiles brought me back. Everything was normal again. Back to being the house I'd found myself calling home. Was I losing my mind? Was this some kind of psychotic break? I staggered forward towards the living room, now feeling a burning heat entering my lungs with every gasp. Everything shifted again. I saw the living room, but it was consumed by lashes of hellfire. I recoiled, feeling the overwhelming power of the blaze. It was growing, lashing out at me when... Everything went back to normal again. I collapsed onto a chair, every inch of me shaking in shock. I heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Jane standing across the room from me. "Something's wrong," I said. "Something's happening to me." She didn't rush to my aid, and her face betrayed not an ounce of concern. "I just needed to hear you admit it first," she said softly. I looked over at her again. She stood with a peculiar stillness I hadn't seen from her before. I've spent the last 30 years transforming myself into what the world told me I was, she said. The things I've seen, the things I've put myself through, you wouldn't believe. I watched as she brought both her legs together and opened her arms, stretched them out on either side of her, so her body was the shape of a cross. You wanted a fucking witch, she screamed. So now I'm gonna give you one. The skin on her face drew gaunt, her eyelids pulled back to reveal entirely white, lifeless eyes. Her hair thinned until it was just spindly, matted strands pressed against a raw, cracking scalp. The teeth crumbled to ash inside her mouth. Her nose sharpened, pointed like a beak. She laughed, a wretched, terrifying cackle that shattered my eardrums and rattled my soul. And then, I went somewhere. Somewhere I can never come back from.